Get everybody into their seats. We'll continue on with Mr. Rob Rappaport.
Okay. No, please. More. Thank you. We're going to do a little bit of a change just because we are on Zoom and a lot of people are watching us from all over. And as far as the questions are great. And what we're going to have is we're going to have two people. We're going to have Jim over there and we're going to have Scott is going to be over here. And so if you have a question, just kind of get their attention and they'll come on. We have to use the mic, which that way we keep everybody engaged. So thank you. Okay, I think we left off from the video. Pretty cool video, and it's able to show us an ignition sequence in live time. But let's move on in our fire cause. Let's talk about cause elimination. One of the most important parts of your reports. If you were to look at reports that were written probably 5 or 10 years ago and back, you wouldn't see any of this because it wasn't a big deal. But it's a very big deal now because it is being consistent with 921 and the scientific method. So once you have your area of origin, you are going to want to address all heat or ignition sources within that area or nearby. And develop a hypothesis for each one of them. Go through the scientific method, test your hypothesis. Can you or can you not eliminate them? If you can, say how you did it. If you can't, say you were unable to, and that's okay also. In order to conclusively determine the cause of a fire, you must eliminate all other reasonable causes, and reasonable is kind of the key word in that. You want to document how you did that. You don't want to leave any question later on for someone to say, well, couldn't it have been that outlet over there? Couldn't it have been this appliance that was plugged in? And also, you didn't address it. So just get in the habit. We're going to show you later on during the report writing of the full report how to conclusively do that. But make sure you're addressing those. Life safety factors are the other final component of the origin and cause section. Very, very important. Has anybody testified by show of hands about smoke detectors, smoke alarms, fire protection systems, either operating or not operating? Okay, one of the most important things, especially with the fire fatality, is to document the presence or absence of smoke alarms. Very, very important. And not just were they there, were they on the floor? Were they up? How were they powered? Was it hardwired? Was it battery only? Was it hardwired with a battery backup? And not only that, were the batteries installed correctly? I've seen times where people have taken the batteries out and then they flip it so that the contacts are not against it because either they're smokers or it activates from the steam of the shower or in the kitchen. Sometimes the batteries are out for different reasons. So you want to document all of those things. During your witness interviews, I would suggest, again, especially if it's a injury or fatality, that you document from witnesses. Did you hear anything? How were you alerted to the fire? And then Bob and I were talking yesterday about the difference between the building's local alarm system compared to the smoke alarm. Those things make a big difference. So if you have a sprinkler system, did it operate? How many heads? That'll give you an indication of an origin, correct? I'll give you the first ones that went off may be an indication of where the fire at least broke through and got hot enough in that area. If you've got a fixed extinguishing system, like a hood system in a commercial kitchen, did it operate? Did it not operate? If it didn't, how come? If it did, why didn't it put out the fire? So these are all the things that you need to identify and discuss. So what I put together here is an example scene. And we're going to write a report based on this example scene. It's a very simple one. It's kind of interesting. Some of you may or may not pay attention to the details of this, but if you look at the small hood system here, let's see. Anything out of the ordinary there? There's no smoke damage on the upper cabinets. Well, this is because when they knew I was coming, they tried to clean it off because they wanted to decrease the amount of damage that was done. So That's why it doesn't look exactly as it did at the fire scene. But we've got our pan on the right-hand side. We've got kind of a circle pattern in there where we've got unburned and burned. That's where the cooking oil was. And on a side note, where do we usually find these? Trash can or the sink, right? Somewhere else. Okay, so when we go through, we're going to have our origin paragraph. I'm going to read it real quick and we're going to talk about it. This fire was determined, or I determined, that the fire originated in the kitchen of Unit 306. That's your general statement. Next sentence. Fire's more specific area of origin was located on top of an electric stove, which was against the north wall. That's the more specific sentence or statement. I go a bit further. Burn patterns indicated that the fire started on the right front burner. Examination of the control knobs revealed the right front one to be on the high position. So we've given a bunch of information. We've got, I think, 3 or 4 sentences. And again, if you were in the parking lot, you'd go to Unit 306, you'd go to the kitchen, you'd go to the north wall and find the stove, and you'd point at the right front burner, and that is as close as we're going to get, right, to this area of origin. We've also talked even about the control knobs being in the high position compared to being to the low position. Does that make a difference? Because now we may or may not have a competent heat source. So, anybody have any questions? This is your origin paragraph. Again, there's going to be sections later on that we can be even more specific if we want. We're going to go into our cause paragraph, 1 of 3. The cause of this fire was conclusively determined to be unattended cooking. What have we done there? That's our topic sentence. The cause was determined to be unattended cooking. Now we talk about what happened before. The tenant of the apartment was heating vegetable oil. Does that sound like material first ignited? In an 8-inch saucepan prior to the fire. While waiting for the oil to heat, she fell asleep on the living room couch and awoke to a fire on top of the stove. So we have an act, or in this case, an omission. Okay? Let's go to the next paragraph. Number 2. The ignition source for this fire was determined to be heat from the electric stove burner right front. The vegetable oil was identified as the fuel first ignited. The tenant stated that she left the stove on when she went to the living room. After the oil reached its ignition temperature, a fire started in the saucepan. Did we get an ignition sequence there? Okay. The fire subsequently spread to the upper kitchen cabinets and kitchen area. A battery-operated smoke detector or alarm, depending, alerted the tenant of the fire and allowed her to escape from the apartment without injury. So we've addressed some life safety issues. We've addressed that she didn't get hurt. She was able to escape and respond. Last paragraph. Examination of the area of origin revealed the presence of an electrical outlet on the east kitchen wall. What part are we doing now? We're eliminating other potential causes. No arcing, mass loss, or evidence of electrical failure was observed. Therefore, I eliminated the structure's electrical system as having contributed to the cause of the fire. Consequently, the fire was determined to be unintentional. Again, that's if we have to give it a cause classification. Scott, we have a taker? We'll get the question on the. A little faster next time, Scott.
I just want to see you walk over. Would you go as far as just visually inspecting that outlet, or would you physically remove it under it, a conductor in the back? We all know it's fairly obvious that it didn't start in that area, but we have to articulate. So just the physical examination just from the exterior or the front, or would you get to the back of it?
That's a great question. I would get in the habit, number 1, of documenting it by your photo. In your room of origin, on your diagram or sketch, I would document that it's there. I would also unscrew, pull it out, and take pictures of the backside as well, because you're showing not only was the front of the receptacle not damaged, but there's no damage to the back of it. You're looking at the wiring and seeing if the insulation is still there, any arcing, so on and so forth. And that would be it for me. Great question. Okay, so You can use this again. I would say this is this is 3 paragraphs or so, 4 paragraphs with the origin. And I think for most fires, you could use this as a decent template. Take out this fire, insert your own, and I think you'll have a decent short report. Okay. What if we need to go further? What if this was a larger loss? What if you're doing it for an insurance carrier or an attorney and we want a full report? We can do that. There's a few different types of reports that we utilize. The public reports, we primarily, how many people here use the 10 category case report or variants of that? Okay, a few people. I'm going to show you in case you didn't know. This is used primarily by police and fire departments. The police use a little different version. They'll do an initial report followed by supplemental reports. In California, at least, the district attorneys, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the state fire marshal approved this format. We use that for most of our public fires. Private side, we're going to talk about some idiosyncrasies with the private reports that are a little bit different than this. They have the same headings almost, but we'll show you a little bit different from those. And also I added a list of opinions. If you're getting ready for a deposition or a trial, especially deposition, the attorneys are going to want to know what you intend on giving opinions about. So I like to keep very organized and put it basically in an outline form, which we'll show, and how I document what my opinions are. So let's start with the 10 category case report. The nice thing is it's kind of like the incident command system or incident management system, where it can be used for small fires, very small fires, up to very large incident with hundreds of witnesses and suspects, and it just expands very well or contracts. Use what you need. There's a section, for instance, about vehicles. Well, if you had a structure fire with no vehicles involved, you wouldn't apply that section or that category. So use what works for you. It does keep the case information together in organized manner so that when you're sitting next to the district attorney or private attorney and they say, hey, who is that guy that said something? I can go to the section for witnesses, you find their name in alphabetical order, and then I can find what they said. Or it'll refer me to the appendix where I've got the entire interview. It assists with documenting the use of the scientific method, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So where do we start? Well, we first start with these multiple categories. There's 10 of them. We're going to use all 10 if it fits, but the section 2 is summary. We're gonna save that to the end because we're gonna write the whole report and we're gonna come back. I'm all about not duplicating efforts. So if we can take a section and put it in the summary, because typically for a intake or filing DA, this may be all they read or all they have time to read is your summary. So we want to get the whole report written first, and then we're going to come back and summarize. So depending how you do things with the computer and folders back at the station or back at your office, always have a report template. So I always have it as a blank template that with your categories on it, and then again, save as. Don't just save that because that kind of messes stuff up when. And I would even suggest if you're back at your investigation unit that you do a read only on your template so that people, when they're saving it as their case report, they're not messing up the original template. So I usually save mine under the case number that I'm working under, the file folder. You can change the header in your report, make sure that's got the case number or the suspect name, whatever it is that you like to use. This comes up quite a bit. I've seen many of your reports, not all of yours, but some of them, and reviewed a lot of reports. This has come into favor a lot. There's a few things that have come into kind of the current flavor. One of them is to use some of these disclaimers. For instance, this investigation was conducted utilizing the guidelines contained in NFPA 921, Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations. Okay, that's great. But did you actually do it? I've read reports where people say they did it, but they don't do it. Or if they did it, they're certainly not putting it in their report. So if you're using the scientific method, there better be places in there where you identify alternative hypotheses, where you break down and say, here's how I eliminated them. And you go through, you don't have to go through specifically, now I'm recognizing the need. Now I'm gathering facts. You don't have to say that, but you have to address all the other potential ignition sources in your area of origin and either eliminate them or not. That's what I mean by doing what it is that you say you're doing. I do like this. Opinions and conclusions may be subject to change should new or additional information be discovered that would alter original findings. Again, if you're doing a draft report and it's not complete yet, or maybe it is complete, but then later on you're presented with additional information, you want to be able to reserve the right to be able to go through and amend or not what your original findings were. Report writing categories. Here's the 10: violation, summary, suspect, or subject. The reason that's there is because you can actually use this report format for an administrative report if you needed to. I don't know if any of you do internal affairs investigations, but this report could be used for that. Witnesses, evidence, conditions, vehicles, property, investigation or narrative, and attachment. So we're going to go one by one through this. I'm going to show you kind of like the definition or why it is that we're using it, and then I'm going to give you an example. So again, the investigators that I had working with me would use this kind of as a flip chart, and they would fill in if it was appropriate or applicable. So violation, this is typically your penal code section if it's an intentional fire and you've got someone under arrest. What are the charges that you're requesting from the district attorney? So you'll write those in there. Get familiar with the enhancements as well, because sometimes, depending if your county doesn't have a specific arson DA, you may be talking to an intake attorney that doesn't know anything about it, and you'll have to kind of help them through and or show the elements of the crime. There's a lot of different ways that people do this. Sometimes they'll list them by count, and then they'll put even a little blurb, maybe like a 1 or 2 sentence that describes it. One way is just to list it with the title of it, but it's up to you. I've seen people do some fancy things, but this is the section 1 where you're requesting what it is that the person did. Section 2 summary, again, we're going to leave this to the end, but for now, it's the most important section that the filing DA will use and probably have time to look at. All elements of the crime and a complete origin and cause are going to be in this section. We're going to go through that in a minute. Like I said earlier, consider reviewing your CALJIC, your jury instructions to see for each crime, have you met the elements and have you described them properly? The nice thing about this, if you write a solid origin and cause section, you can copy and paste that into other documents later on. So for instance, you're going to do a search warrant. Part of your probable cause statement after your hero sheet information is going to be about the case. And you can copy and paste it right in there, and then you get more specific as to what it is that you're looking for and why, but at least you'll have that section that you can put in there. Same goes for arrest warrants. You can copy and paste this section. So if you write it completely, you can use it for multiple things. I like to start my paragraph similar to how many of you would write an INFRS report. So your notification and a brief synopsis of the fire. So you responded to, how did you get there? Were you there with your partner? You don't have to put response times or anything like that. Either I was on duty, I was off duty, but you arrived there. It was a blank type of fire. Possibly it was a commercial structure fire, residential structure fire. Was it completely burned? Was it partially burned? Just a little blurb so the reader has an idea of what they're dealing with. In order to arrest, you may have to conclusively eliminate all unintentional causes. I was talking to someone the other day about a legitimate arson fire started in multiple areas, but the investigator wrote in one of the areas he was unable to eliminate an outlet as a potential cause. So you can see how that would be a problem if you have someone in custody that you say intentionally did this, but then you're saying, well, it's also possible there was an accidental source. So just make sure you're identifying and explaining how the subject specifically did what they did. State your important points that support your opinion and conclusion. Many of these points will include fire effects and patterns, right? That'll help you get to your area of origin. Any evidence found? What is that evidence? And again, you're not listing it. There's another section for that. This is taking things together like, hey, I interviewed the suspect at the scene and he had a blue lighter in his pocket. He stated he used this to ignite, whatever. So you're giving a summary of the information. All the specifics are going to be later on in the report. We all know that we don't need motive to prove our case, but many times, especially as an investigative technique, it's very helpful. So, notification, how are you notified? By whom, date, when, and where? When did you arrive at the scene? Here's an example. Notified by the dispatch on the date and time, subsequently responded from the station and arrived at approximately 3 a.m. So now someone's going to look at that. Be careful what you say, because when I'm reviewing reports and I say, wow, the fire started at 2:30 in the morning on Monday and the investigator didn't arrive till Thursday afternoon, next question is going to be, was the scene held properly? Is there an issue? Why did it take so long, so on and so forth. So just make sure if there's anything out of the ordinary that you address that. Section 3 is subjects and suspects. Here's where you list all of them. I encourage you to use whatever format you use. I just like using S for suspect, and then hyphen, and then the number. Now you can do alphabetical order. You can say, because sometimes you have multiple suspects. Sometimes people like, and I think Bob may get into this also, sometimes people like all caps for the last name and then, sentence case for the first name, then how do you do, brothers or juniors and stuff like that. But however you do it, in an organized fashion, list all your suspects and all the information you have on them. So typically an address, if they're not transient, phone numbers. Typically now they're all cell phone numbers, but get all of the phone numbers. And remember, the information that you get, the more the better, because sometimes these go to court 2-3 years later, and now you're trying to find witnesses or victims or whoever, and just the more information you have, the more chance you are to get a hold of them. Section 4 is victims, witnesses, or others. Again, you're obtaining the same information that you had before. Victim typically is someone who suffered a loss. If it's a palm tree on the right-of-way, maybe it's the city is the victim or the county. A witness is somebody who either saw, heard, has some sort of knowledge about or first-hand information about the incident. Obviously, for your prelims, you as the investigating officer, can testify for others, but for trial, you don't have that capability. And other really is anybody else that works with you or for you, other investigators, dog handlers, canine teams, engineers, criminalists, anybody else gets listed there. This, needless to say, don't put other officers' cell phone numbers, as work numbers and work addresses, because of course these become public record at some point. Also, under the victims, witnesses, or others, especially victims, report any injuries. Now, again, make sure you're HIPAA compliant. Don't include, personal information, and I probably would not. It depends. You may or may not include patient care reports, PCRs, or run reports in there unless there's a reason for it. But did anybody suffer any injuries or was there any deaths as a result? I like to give this basic information, 60%, whatever the doctors will say as far as, burn injuries or smoke inhalation. More importantly, what were they doing? If prior to that fire, were they escaping? Were they? Did they get caught and couldn't escape out of a bedroom window that has security bars? Was the latch working? That's also under life safety factors as well. How was the victim found? Location, position, were they treated on scene and released? Were they transported? Where'd they go to? That kind of thing will be helpful for later on. Here's an example of your reported injury. And because all of you have access to all the notes, I'm not going to read you all of the things, but suffice to say, you've got the examples there that you can use, add or delete as you need. Section 5 is evidence collected. Again, you want to list all of your evidence. Most of us have collected evidence in the past. It's important that you are very organized with it, especially if there's a lot of evidence in your case, and it may be from different locations. You may serve search warrants 6 months from now and find additional evidence at another place that you're going to want to include. I would always make sure that however you number it, make sure that you've got chain of custody, make sure you package everything correctly, make sure that on your diagram, if you want to put, number 1 with a circle on it and where you found it, that's great. Then number 1 should be matching number 1 of the evidence type. Does that make sense? The hard part many times, how many people have taken their evidence to the laboratory for analysis or sent it in? Okay, so a few people. So let's say, for instance, you have 10 items of evidence, some fire debris samples, maybe you have a DVR that you took, I don't know, whatever kind of evidence that you have, an outlet or something like that. But you're only submitting items 2, 4, and 6 to the lab. When you go and you fill out your submission form for the laboratory, and number 2 goes on number 1 and number 4 goes on number 2 line, it can get confusing. So just make sure you keep everything specific. If you put item 2 under line number 1, you're going to put item 2 and then list what the name is. So that way you keep everything straight. Make sure the chain of custody, of course, is not broken. Now, this is interesting. Include a statement documenting your collection techniques are consistent with 921, section 17.4 on. Those sections deal with evidence collection. Now, there may be a problem. For instance, here's an example. At the bottom says all evidence items were collected consistent with 921 guidelines. I changed gloves and washed collection tools prior to and between sample collection. That's great. And I know a lot of people say I do it per 921. Unless you're doing it exactly per 921, you may not want to put something like that in here. Now, definitely when you're photographing the scene and you're collecting evidence, if you have a couple 5-gallon buckets, one with clear water, the other with soap, and you're showing and you got your scrub brush, I would take pictures and document all that. And at the end, you should have a pile of used gloves that you've changed between. And if that's what you did, then absolutely you can put that there. But if not, just be very cautious. Question, where's Jim? Hold on one sec.
I find it useful to number the gloves so that when you're taking the picture and make that consistent with that evidence sample. So you're using a different pair of gloves for each one.
Great. That's a great point. And the comment was to number, maybe just with the indelible marker, the item number on the actual gloves, and you can lay everything out and show that this went to that. That's a great idea. Conditions. This is where you can describe your weather, and this may or may not have anything to do with your case, but if you've got a static electricity case, would that be important to be showing like the temperature and relative humidity? Yeah, especially for a wildland fire. You're gonna wanna know, I usually look for the RAWS data, right? You can get on their underground for their history. Remember, you may have microclimates in your area. So just because the RAWS station, the closest one is 3 miles away, it may be a little different where you are, but that may have a lot to do with your case, and your fire spread is the wind direction and wind speed. Here's an example of weather. Now, some people will print out, copy from the Weather Underground and then highlight the closest time and put that in as an attachment. That's fine as well. Some of the other conditions that have to do with the scene: how was the property secured? Was there fencing? Were there holes in the fence? Was it something locked? Was it unlocked? Again, one of the most important things is to interview. I think Ed said yesterday, interview the RP, but the first in firefighters. I'm going to show you a case review in a little bit where the entry is very important. So was the door forced? Did they find it unlocked or not? Was it unoccupied or occupied? When was the last time someone was there? What do the doors and windows look like? Again, document that. Any forced entry, if there was, who did it? May have been us, maybe in our truck company or somebody else. And here's an example of your security. Some other conditions to look at real quick. Utility service. You don't want to document your utility service and gas service or propane, if it's on propane. When was the last time, especially for propane, if that's something that has to do with your case or possibly an explosion or a leak, when was the last time it was filled? And then your weather comes into play also. What was the temperature when it was filled? For your electrical service, always document your main circuit breaker box or any sub panels. And sometimes you can do that just with a photograph. Other times you'll actually want to document which ones were tripped in the on or the off position. And that may be a factor later on if you've got those traced in your area of origin. Either way, you're going to check and document any damage, any trip breakers. What was the other thing we have here? Any overcurrent protection. We don't really see a lot of the pennies or aluminum foil in the fuses anymore. But here's an example of your utility service that you can use for your report, documenting where it is, how it comes in, whether it's on or not. Sometimes for an arson fire, is it helpful when there was no power to the building? That's helpful. We can, as long as you don't have truck batteries there or extension cord running to the neighbors, you can usually eliminate the electrical. Here's another category that we have that you can use or not use if it suits your scene. Was there an alarm system? Has anybody had any luck with alarm records for their cases? I have wonderful results many times from alarm records. Now remember, there's typically the brain at the fire scene, and hopefully it's in a back office or hallway or bathroom or something like that where it's relatively protected that you can download data from. But they'll give you an event log, and the event log will tell you, open, closed, armed, not armed, depending on the system. And if you have different users with different codes, who did what, when this occurred, when that occurred. It'll also give you like a system check on there. Every 24 hours, typically if it's monitored, the monitoring company will send a little message and it'll send it back. Yep, everything's good here. But you can see that because a lot of times when surveillance cameras or alarms are installed, sometimes the installer doesn't have the exact correct time. So you're going to want to make sure you have some hard times that you can match things up and make sure it's accurate. Alarm records from the monitoring company. Find out if they have. So all of that information is great information to gather. You're going to put that in this location. Sprinkler system, again, did it operate? Number of heads, smoke alarms, extinguishers. If it's an apartment, condo, did they have sufficient extinguishers there? Surveillance camera footage. Anybody use surveillance camera footage? A lot of people. Man, 20 years ago, we didn't have very much at all, but now we're having a ton of, they're everywhere. Ring cameras, surveillance on residences, commercial, all that. This is where it goes. And here's just a little example. Again, this may be a very short example. This may be a very important part of your report. You're going to want to beef this up if you have the information. Some of the exposure damage you can describe to any outbuildings or nearby apartments. Did the fire lap up to the third floor and affect unit 314? That person's information is probably going to be in the section under subjects, right? Or maybe victims, witnesses, and others. So it just depends. You want to make sure they're sometimes in both places. Here's an example of your exposure. And perimeter search. When you walked around the property and you checked in the garbage cans and you looked over into the neighbors' yards to see if someone tossed a container or some sort of incriminating evidence, what did you find? Did you find anything? If you did, Ed was talking yesterday, especially on wildland fires, for imprints for tires, imprints for, boots, footprints, anything like that. Here's an example. Found item A, a pair of brown gloves. Both gloves had an odor similar to that of ignitable liquid on them. If you had that, that's probably going to go under category 5, right, for evidence, going to be listed there. You may have an attachment of a report from the lab for it. So sometimes, again, you're going to talk about different things in different sections. Okay, your exterior scene examination. When you're looking at the outside, how do you describe what's on the outside? Descriptions are very subjective. Here's the problem. If I talk to someone, a tenant, this is the first time they've ever seen a fire or had a fire, they'll probably tell you, oh my God, it was so bad. The place is burned to the ground, right? When they're telling their friends or on Facebook or whatever. You go there as an investigator and you look at it and you think, well, geez, there's light smoke damage in a little bit of the house, a little heavier in this room, and there's a small origin here. It's light damage. So it's subjective. The way I like to do this is to offer some objectivity to it. And again, if you were to look at the spectrum and say there's no fire damage, on the other, so severe that there's nothing left, somewhere in the middle, you can make some identifiers and just be consistent with that throughout your report and really throughout all your reports. I use something like slight, light, moderate, heavy, or severe. We could sit here all afternoon, I think, or all morning talking about the differences. But whatever it is that you decide to use, just be consistent with it or describe it. Describe a little more. I usually like to split up north, south, east, west sides. And I talk about, is there fire damage? Is there smoke damage? Is there heat damage? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from a window? Is it coming from a door? Sometimes there's no damage at all, but work your way around. And here's an example. Talk about, possibly the roof structure. If the fire department cut holes in the roof, would that be something that would affect your fire flow? Sure, it's pulling all the fire out in that area, depending where they cut the hole. So that may be something that you document. Interior scene exam is very similar to the exterior scene exam, but they're inside rooms. So instead of north, south, east, west, I would break it up into naming the rooms. Sometimes, everything's not true north or south. And you may have to number them. However you do it, make sure it is documented the same on your diagram as it is in your report. If you can identify the fire spread through the structure, this is also known as your heat. Is that on here yet? No. We'll talk about that. But your flame vectors, we have little arrows you can put. If you have indicators that you find that for instance, the door jamb, you can say, hey, the fire moved from the hallway into this bedroom, or was in this bedroom, moved out into here. I always like to start with each of my rooms as far as, did the fire move into there or did it come out of there? And then I discuss, maybe it's damage to the interior walls, maybe it's damage to the furniture or the contents in there. You want to identify, here's where you identify all of your fire patterns, your effects and patterns. Right? So you've got a U-shaped pattern, a circle pattern on the ceiling. There's heavier damage on this side. It's a truncated pattern. Whatever it is, this is where you describe in more detail the interior. Identify and address all possible ignition sources or appliances in or near the area of origin. We've already discussed the area of origin. And document how you arrived. This is very important. In addition to identifying your alternative hypotheses, all of the ignition sources in your area of origin, I like to write out, like in bullet point or list, all of your fire indicators. So if you are going to use the the west side upper kitchen cabinets as an indicator, I would say number one, upper kitchen cabinets, and I would describe that. I had heavier charring on this side. I had no damage. I had a lot of damage, whatever it was. Okay, now I'm going to use the the lower counter on the east side as an indicator to point that it's going this way, and I describe that. So again, you're showing and documenting how you arrived at your origin by documenting, just like you would on a wildland fire, when you've got tree trunks or grass stems or whatever, and you're trying to show where the fire movement was from and to. This is where you do it. So here's a little example of a living room where the whether there were, in this instance, there were no contents in the room. Is that important? Lack of contents, right? Next section is adverse conditions. Were there extreme conditions that affected your ability to determine the origin or cause of this fire? If there was, then this is where you state it. Sometimes there's extended burn time. You review the fire department report and you find out that from the dispatch to the on-scene time was 20 minutes. That was just the first engine, and the second one followed, 13 minutes after that, and there's no water supply. I mean, that's kind of stuff that you'd want to identify because it addresses the effects that you're seeing or the extreme damage. Some areas, the goal is to remove all content items, including the carpet and tack and wood, window casings and door jambs, and put them all out in the parking lot for us to come by. Anybody dealt with a situation like that? Usually it doesn't happen with the fire department, except sometimes as an investigator, you get on scene and there's, a line of people carrying stuff out, tossing it out the window. But typically on the private side, we see this because we're there, a few days later or weeks later, and everything is now in the parking lot to reconstruct, right?
No. Let me just say something about words and how important they are. I have a section in my report as well, but I don't call it adverse conditions or adverse. And again, I started thinking about, well, I title it something differently. I said, well, maybe I've got the wrong words to use. Maybe I'm using the wrong word. But if you look up the definition of adverse, it says preventing success or development, harmful, unfavorable. Okay, so these conditions are preventing your success. I'm just, I didn't even sleep at a Holiday Inn at night, and I'm still thinking about ways that opposing counsel can make it really uncomfortable by just bringing that stuff up. They want to see how you're going to respond to it. Well, you had adverse conditions, and do you know what the definition of adverse is? It's preventing success. So how can you possibly, if you had adverse conditions that were preventing your success, it's silly. So it may sound silly. I use constraints and limitations, and I discuss any constraints or limitations that I may have encountered. Now, we could look up those definitions, and it may say synonym, adverse, I don't know. But again, what we're trying to do is not teach you what to do, is to think about what you are doing. Like Randy said the first day, we're not here to teach you. We want to change your behavior. We want you to think differently about how these reports are going together. And this is just one example. I mean, and there's hundreds of them out there. But
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a great point. Words are very important, and we have to make sure. The point of this is to show if things have been moved around, which typically they are. That may preclude you. You may have to look for things in other areas or reconstruct the scene, right? We've done that many times and bring stuff back in. Okay, some possible ignition sources. We talked about this. Sometimes there's a matrix that you can use. And here's just an example of one where it's kind of a checkbox, where you can look at this and say, hey, I addressed these things. You can add, I probably wouldn't delete, but you can add different things and say, yes, no, probable, if you can't say yes for sure, or undetermined, right? You don't know. This should match up with your discussion on your alternative hypotheses to do more talking about it. Anybody have any question on that ignition source kind of a matrix. Okay. Here's the ignition source, material first ignited, and your fire development. This is where the fire cause and your ignition sequence is specifically lined out. You want to identify the ignition or heat source, material first ignited, how they came together. Was this a smoldering type fire, or was it accelerated by ignitable liquids? Whatever it is, you want to talk a little bit about how the fire developed. You know, for instance, I had a fire the other day. It was a commercial kitchen, and the fire started in a wall next to the cooktop. And probably many of you have been on fires similar to this. You look inside the wall and you think, well, geez, there's nothing here. There was a layer of stainless steel, right? And then behind that, you've got some drywall, some OSB, and you've got the studs. Like, there's nothing else there. There's no electrical running through there. There's nothing. So how did this occur? Well, you start looking at patterns on the stainless steel, and then you start measuring, wow, the greatest degree of damage in here measures right up where the height of the stovetop was. And then you do interviews and you find out, yeah, they had boiling potatoes on an oversized pot that's, so now we get to a lot of other issues, who installed it and put it there and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter was, this was a more smoldering fire that then, once it got going, got some oxygen, went into open flame. You want to be able to describe those things. So this is where you do it. And here's a quick example. Next one of the most important parts of your report, in my mind, is your consideration of alternative hypotheses. Do you see that we're developing a pattern here? Randy kind of started off the conference with talking about 921 and how things are progressing. And one of the biggest things is identifying that there's alternative hypotheses and how are we addressing them. So this is where you do it. You can line them out, as a list, one through whatever. However you want to do it. What has anybody else offered? Maybe you have a cooking fire. It looks like unattended cooking, but you interview the tenant and he says, oh no, this stove wasn't working that well. And I said, well, what's the problem with it? Well, sometimes it would just come on and didn't really work. And I told the manager about it and so on and so forth. So has he now offered a different hypothesis than what I've come up with? Yeah. So we want to address this. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe we need to take this to a lab and have an engineer look at it to determine whether that's valid or not valid. If you're not able to eliminate, say you're able to eliminate it and why. Okay, but this is a very, very important section. And again, you want to utilize this with the matrix that we just talked about. And here's an example. So I want to talk a little about a fire. It's an ongoing fire investigation, I should say. And it's kind of an interesting case. It's a commercial fire. And basically, the two pictures are a continuation of one another. So for instance, this is the entry door, goes into a small office. And that's a window. This window right there is the same as this window. Then we've got a roll up here, another window and a door. So it kind of flows like that, like a little mosaic. What do you notice here? Let's talk about our exterior observations. Tell me what you think. Real quick, we'll get our. Just raise your hand and then we'll come up real quick.
So there's more heat and smoke damage on the right side of the building than on the left side. There seems to be relatively little where the entrance is, where you identified as the office. And then I have no idea. I'm assuming the trailer is for debris. But
correct. Correct. The trailer is debris. Okay, good. So we've got a lot more. Thank you. We've got a lot more fire damage on the right side of the building. And the left side, now looking at the left side, Doors. These are two outswinging glass doors with metal frame. What do you see that's interesting about this? So we've got soot damage on one side only, correct? On the right side, and the other side does not. Okay, we're going to come back to that. So this structure has, they sell clothing and accessories, and they usually get it at a low price. Maybe, you know, last year's, it's kind of like Nordstrom's Rack or some of the other, you know, last year's models, or maybe there's a little snag on it or something like that. But they're an Amazon, eBay or Amazon store, one of the two. And so they get it in for, you know, 30 cents on the dollar. They sell it at the spread, and then, you know, they make some money. So this is their warehouse where they process orders. And so someone puts an order in for this blouse, and they go to, you know, the cabinet. They're all on these kind of racks. It's kind of an interesting thing. I'll show you a picture in a second. And they go to, you know, rack 219, they take it out, and then they ship it out. So the fire certainly started on the interior of this, and let's take a look at what that looks like. On the left-hand side, photograph, we're looking from the standing kind of in the office, which was the left side of the building, and we're facing the south. So on the right side of the left picture, if I'm saying that correctly, in fact, let me use this. This is that window that you saw, and then that's the steel roll up and the small door and everything back behind. So, and this is all the debris. What do you see as a result of this photograph on the left? Damage, fire damage? A fully vented, okay, a vented fire. Look at the roof structure real quick. In fact, if you look on the right-hand side, there's a clue on there. What do you think was part of the flat roof? What was it? What was on there? In addition to some AC units. Skylights. Yep, there's some skylights, and you can see the outline out. Look on the left side photo, especially right here. That's the skylight. So you got these skylights. I think there's 4 of them coming across. So we've got a bunch of fire damage in there. So I conduct the investigation. I look in there, and there's just a lot of burn stuff. Now there's kind of tweaking to and twisting of some of these metal racks here and in the back, showing some heat. But there's, you know, it's probably 4 foot of debris tall all around. What would you determine at this point, your first swipe out there, what would you determine the cause of the fire is at this point? Okay, someone said under investigation. Would we call it, can we tell with what we know right now if it's intentional or unintentional? So we don't know. Can we tell if there's ignitable liquids used? On this day, I took a sample because I found some areas of low burning down towards the back by that roll-up door and even past that. So I took a sample, but at this point, I looked around on that wall where the window is. There's some outlets, but very little damage to them. I can eliminate those, no problem. There was nothing plugged in. There was a forklift right here. I don't know if you can see it. Forklift over there. But then there's the rigid conduit that has that powers fluorescent lights above. That's about it for ignition sources that I found in there. There's no power cord, appliances or cords or anything like that. But at this point, I don't have my lab results back, and I haven't talked to anybody yet. So I call it undetermined preliminarily. Unresolved is best. So I do an interview with the owner of the business who rents it, right? So we've got the building owner, and then we have the tenant. And so I talked to the tenant and get an interview with him, and he has an alibi. Very interesting, just like when we were talking to Ed, or when Ed was talking to us yesterday. Many times the suspects all have an alibi. This guy, his wife was actually giving birth, so he was at the hospital. Sounds legit. But when I talked to him, he just he followed me around during the investigation and just kind of he's like, "Hey, what do you think? What do you think? What do you know?" And I said, "Well, we're still working on it." And anyhow, just kind of a little weird. And when I reported back to the insurance company, I said, hey, this may be an intentionally set fire. Don't know yet, but it's ongoing. One of the interesting things was I found some surveillance video. Anytime you're at the fire scene, I always suggest you stand there and look around, right? And not only right there, but look around the area. You never know when there's going to be a camera. Well, there happened to be a camera, which I'm going to show you in a minute, that you can see this building. But I talked to him. I said, hey, do you have any surveillance cameras inside? And he said, yeah. I said, okay, well, is there DVR or is it remote or how's it work? He said, oh, there's a DVR and a monitor. I said, okay, great. And asked him where it was, tried to find out that. And I said, so it works. And he goes, yeah, I got like 3 cameras. You can see everything inside, 3 or 4 cameras. I said, okay, great. So I go in and I find the DVR. And this is what the DVR looks like. This is the back of it. This is the left-hand side picture. And this is the back where all the connections are. However, nothing's connected to it. So the cameras are not connected to the DVR. Could that be a red flag? Something to look at and see? Why do you think? Why would that be an issue? So, well, somebody, if he says they were working, somebody must have done something with it. I don't know who did something with it, but somebody intentionally did that. Then you have to ask yourself the question, if someone's coming in, would they know, where that was or how to get to it or not? I don't know. So we're going to see, but that's kind of an interesting fact. So I took some time and found the surveillance video, which I'll show you in a second. And on the right side, we ended up going back out and dug the scene out and brought it down to floor level. It's nice epoxied floor, but you can see some irregular shaped patterns right on the ground. We don't call them pour patterns anymore, right? We don't call those pour patterns, but definitely low burning. And this is where I got some samples, sent it back to the lab. The lab came back with this. On the bottom, results and interpretations, weathered and degraded gasoline, present items 1 and 3. I submitted one first, and then on the second time I was out there, took another sample and sent that back in. So they're both positive for gasoline. All right, well, why do we have gasoline in a commercial building like this? And the forklift also is electric, by the way. So no propane, no gas. There's no reason for stuff to be in there. So let's take a look at the surveillance video. And I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Because it goes slow. So just to give you an idea, the where the camera is north. We're facing south. So straight ahead of us, to give you an idea. Come on. That's the street out there, left to right, under the time. We're going to see some action over there. This is the building on the left-hand side. And right over the corner where the circle is that one square window, okay? So I'm looking at this, and you can see right now people walking on the street. This is 1:52 in the morning. This is off by like 47 minutes or something like that. So after, I'm going to tell you about how we get the hard and soft times. But it's about 1 in the morning or so. And what we're going to see is a vehicle come up. So let me bring it to that. Let's see.
You doing this fire on the private side?
Yes. So we're going to see a car coming from the right to the left. Here it comes. And it drives up very slow. Tail lights on or brake lights on. and keeps going. So that's 158. I'm going to speed it up just for sake of the class. We're now going to see it come from left to right. Now this is going to come into play a little bit later. And at this point, when you're just watching this, it doesn't really make too much sense. You're thinking it's just a car. But from left to right coming up, you'll see it drive by again. Nice and slow. Same car. Okay, now there's no way I can get a license plate off this because it's, probably 300 feet away, 200 feet away. You're also going to see it come back. And we're going to see it come from right to left. There it is. And then they stay there for a minute. They park there. This is out on the street. There's a fence, actually a metal gate that they have to climb over. But let me speed it up. They're kind of waiting. Then they get out. I want you to watch closely. It's hard. Come on. So he just left. Okay, look right here. They're going to jump the fence. They're climbing the fence right there above the hand. They just came over. They have headlights on, headlamps. And they are walking along the building. See them right there? Two of them, just walking. The car is turning around right there. He just turned around. Okay, so this is 203, let's call it. I'm going to fast forward it to, so they're in the building at probably right now about 203. So about 4 minutes later, I want you to watch the left side of the screen. Right here where the cursor is. See that? What do you see? Orange glow. You want me to put that back? See it right there? Hold on. And there. So somewhere in there, and of course, this is, of course, a little bit out, but they were in there for, I think, about 3.5, 4 minutes. And that includes making entry. So what does that tell you? They possibly know the building. Now, well, let me ask a question. Do you think they knew the building? Or do you think they just knew the address? They passed by a couple times, right? So is it, hey, I'm looking for the address, or I'm looking to see if people are around? But you see how they walked along the building? Like they've been there before, like they know that building and they know where the entrance is. They're in there very quick. So if you're in this structure that you don't know, how on earth are you going to know where the DVR is, right? How are you going to pour ignitable liquids throughout and ignite it and then come back out. Let me see. There at 208.10. I think we just missed him while I'm talking. All right, so let's look again. You can see the glow. See him running? Oops. Come on. They're right there at the end. There they are. They're hopping the fence. And they're going to get in the car and drive away. So the fires, you see the fire burning behind them in the window. So they're in the car and there they go. Now the other thing is, again, this is far away. It's not perfect, right in front of us. But I didn't see, it doesn't look like they're wearing they could be wearing some backpacks, but they weren't like tossing stuff over. So my thing is it possible that there was gasoline already staged in there, right? The doors, we talked about the doors. We saw the smoke staining on one of them, one side of the door. The door was in the locked position. And so they broke the window. That's how the smoke is getting out of there. So I was hoping that it would be locked, but not broken. But that wasn't the case. Because if that was the case, then what could I show? Someone had a key, right? And during my interview, I already confirmed that he was the only person, the owner is the only person that has the key. There's only one key, and he's the only one to have it. So what are your guys' thoughts on this one? Oh, give him the...
Testing. I'd like to know what was on the DVR anyway, and if it depicted somebody unhooking something.
So good question. The DVR was damaged too much to be able to extract any information on it, unfortunately. But to me, the fact that we had stuff disconnected at the back shows intent. So since we're talking about fire reports and we're talking about incendiary fires, is this, we were undetermined before, and now we have additional information, right, that we're talking about that will lead us, can we now call this an incendiary fire? So we can eliminate the fluorescent lights, light fixtures. There's no outlets that were damaged in that area. And we've got positive samples from the laboratory. We've got a video of people coming in. So now how do we connect those two? So Ed was talking about yesterday. How do we connect these two? Is it the insured or not? So we got smoke coming across, probably coming out that door. Very quickly, it's through the roof. And I think it's through the roof because we had the skylights. Okay, so it's pushing out smoke, most probably from that door. Now,
Bob,
yes, sir, real quick, hold on.
Who made the call that the DVR was too damaged to get anything off? Did you take it and have it examined?
It hasn't been yet, but that was my call. Just looking at it, it was way beyond. It took severe heat and fire damage. Yeah. Now, I have had some that you can take in, and they've done more magic than I thought. So that's always a possibility. But I've had stuff that's less damaged that weren't able to get stuff off. But it looks to me like it's pretty severe. Someone else had a question? We got a mic for him?
I was curious if we confirmed the alibi of being at the hospital, and does he have a vehicle or anybody who knows of a vehicle that matches the one that we saw in the video? Excellent
Question. The question was, do we have any information about the vehicle? And what was the other one? Confirm the alibi. He's going to get sent to an examination under oath. So for this one, I didn't do too much of digging because I know that's coming. As far as him being at the hospital, he was at the hospital where his wife was giving birth for a number of days. We can't tell for sure was he there the whole time? They didn't have like, the whole access, key entry and stuff like that. So I don't know for sure. But one of the things that the public fire investigator did was is looking for cell phone records because it's sufficiently away from this location where he said he was. So that would be very interesting to see, what cell sites he was bouncing off of. And more importantly, who's calling him? This is one in the morning. Who's calling him? Who's he calling? Before and after the fire kind of thing. So a lot of this is a lot of investigative work. We see the fire growing now over time. We're at 213. We'll start. Let me put this forward a little bit, and we're going to go to one last one.
Hey, Rob?
Yeah.
I had a question regarding the alibi in the labor room. So baby theft is a big issue. My wife being a labor delivery nurse. So there are surveillance cameras all over there. So you might want to check that.
Great idea. Great idea. Thank you.
Were there any other cameras associated with that building we see in the background looking the opposite direction?
No other cameras there. I'm going to show you one thing. And I'm going to get right back to cameras. All right. So we're going to go to 215. So as we continue, we're going to start seeing red lights right up there. See at the top of the, you can see embers dropping. And right here, we start to see some lights. Those are red lights from first in engine. So when the first in engine arrives on scene, can we use that as a hard time and check the dispatch log? And then we know, okay, at 2:15, at 2:16 on the camera is actually, 1:38 a.m. Right now, we're going to be plus or minus a minute or so, depending on how quickly they press their on scene or if it does it automatically. So they're going to go to work here. And I think a lot of water was flowed. I don't know for sure, but I think they had a truck company with a master stream. So there's probably a lot of water and dilution. So great question about surveillance cameras. Where else? Now we're looking here and I see this vehicle going back and forth and I think to myself, well, let me go along that road and see if there's any other cameras from any buildings. Well, if you go to the right of the screen, it comes to a T intersection. And again, this is a commercial area. And lo and behold, there's a lumber yard there with a camera that faces right on the street, and we're gonna show you that. So as we are looking here, we see headlights coming towards us. We're in the lumber yard, and that would be if the person was driving from the fire scene to the right, if that made sense. And so this gives us another angle and or ability to, you guys hear me okay? Okay. And the ability to possibly to get a better vehicle description and or license plate. Now, just because we get a license plate, does that mean that's the actual license plate or could it have been swapped out? That's possible. But anyway, let's take a look at this. This is not the suspect vehicle. It just happens to be another one coming. And turns. Now, the interesting thing is when I had this angle, I saw another vehicle come by. It's a red vehicle. This is a little bit later, but the red vehicle goes from the left of the screen to the right, and there's nothing back there. It's all industrial, commercial in the middle of the night. But I see them come in within seconds of the other vehicle and leave within seconds of the other vehicle. So there's actually two vehicles involved. So that gives you a little better chance to find out what's going on and possibly to identify who's got these vehicles.
Is there a reason this video wasn't time and date stamped?
Yeah, they didn't have it. They didn't have it on there. That's a great question. This was part of the problem also. I think in this one, it was more of a motion sensor. So if there's no motion, it doesn't record. And then if you get some motion, it clicks on. But what we ended up getting on this one, there's 4 different ones. Oh, the first one's going to come in a few seconds. We're going to see the one, because otherwise there's no reason for anybody to be in this area. See that red car just go by? They were in an area, they had already gotten in there. That's on another video. And then they're taking off, and here comes our suspect vehicle. Remember when he drove by and then came back around? This is what he was doing down here. So this gives you another, and this is before the fire was set. So this gives you another angle, another possibility. Now I even looked even up the street. A lot of times you can get cameras on the traffic cameras. Sometimes on busier intersections, you may be able to get some of those. Sometimes car readers, if they have those in your area, sometimes they're on the main drags kind of coming in and out of town. Sometimes they'll pick those up and you can say, hey, this car, you know, or here's the cars that went through this intersection between the times of this and this. You may be able to get some information. We're not able to get the license number. Now it looks like it's a, I think it's like a Mitsubishi, but not certain. Anyhow, I just want to use that more of a depiction of how you can have a fire cause initially, get additional information, alter or amend your cause. And now this is absolutely, you know, they have 4 minutes inside or less, depending how long it took them to break the window to get inside. So I'm going to scoot through because we want to get to lunch at a decent time. Room of origin. This area or this part of the report has to do with possibly fire modeling in the future. So if you're going to do a fire model, you need to know dimensions of them. So this is where you describe it. You know, where the doorways 2'6" by 6'8", were they 3-foot doors? You know, what's the floor coverings? Is it, you know, drywall? What's the opening size for the windows? What kind of items are there? And NFPA 921, those sections address the fire modeling. Here's a possible description of your room of origin. And we talk about fire indicators. So again, list them in this section. You can talk about sequential pattern analysis, including your depth of char, your depth of calcination, your heat and flame vector analysis, and movement and intensity patterns. So if you want to identify those, here's the section to do it, and you have an example. Section 7 is for vehicles. Again, if there's no vehicles associated with your case, put not applicable. If there are, maybe the suspect owns it. Maybe a vehicle was seen leaving the scene that you've got information about. Or maybe there was an exposure of a vehicle. Any of those things are going to be what you'd want to document there. Overall condition of the property is category 8. Was it improving? Is it poor neighborhood as far as, you know, dilapidated? Is it residential, commercial, industrial? Is it urban or suburban? What do the exterior grounds look like? Are they kept up? Is there a lot of trash or debris? Is it well manicured lawns? Structure on a corner lot on the middle of the street, adjacent to structures? Just kind of what was it about? Talk about the construction type. I'm going to fly right through some of the stuff. You guys can read this at your leisure. But what was the construction type? About how old was it? How big is the unit? You know, how many square feet? You can get a lot of information on Zillow. Is a great, a lot of investigators access Zillow from the scene. You can get photos if it had recently been sold. Again, like Ed was saying yesterday, when you're talking about a for sale sign, what does that mean? Well, maybe nothing, maybe everything, right? Maybe it's a motive. Maybe it gives you some people to call and talk to and interview. Section 9 is the narrative. So again, how the fire is reported. You start off with your first caller to 911. Who was that? What did they see? Did you interview them? Then you talk about your notification, which we talked about in an earlier section. Quick example, how the fire was reported. And then I talk in this section, this is the category 9. I talk about overall what we did at the scene. Okay, we conducted an origin and cause investigation. We interviewed witnesses. We got statements from the owner. You don't want to duplicate any of your information that's somewhere else in the report. But again, just a brief synopsis of what happened. If you had a canine handler and canine come out and they alerted positively in different areas, you can say that. You can say, hey, I collected evidence, submitted to the lab, but it's a basic on-scene investigation. Speaking of interviews, when you're interviewing somebody, get all the information like we talked about in sections 3 and 4. If you have a suspect, indicate if it's voluntary or if it's custodial. If it's custodial and you are reading them their Miranda warning rights, make sure you document that you did that. I would encourage everybody to do an audio recording of your interviews. They're super helpful later, especially months later when you re-interview somebody and they say, oh, I said this. And you said, no, you said that. And it's just an argument about what they said. And it's like, there's no need for an argument. Let me play this for you. You said this, and here it is. Include any other pertinent facts. If you have an interview that you've uploaded, the audio for, document that. That becomes a piece of evidence on category 5 on your list of evidence items. And what else do we have? That's the on scene. We're coming up on the supplemental investigation. This is a running log of your investigation on a daily basis. You go out and you interview somebody, you document it. This is done after the initial investigation. Okay, so it's like a running log. Now, all of the things that you gather and collect, such as an interview or statement of somebody, that's going to be on its own written form. You're going to put that at the end under attachments that we're going to talk about. But here's an example of the supplemental section. It's just basically the date, what you did, the who, what, when, where, and why. It could be something I dropped off an 1875 letter to Farmers Insurance. Okay, you're documenting what you did and when you did it. Okay, hear me okay? So far, so good? Okay. You may consider citing, just like you would in any other report, with footnotes and or a reference page. Here's a reference example. You say where you got your information, and you're just basically documenting where you received information and where other people can find it later on. Last category is attachments. This is where everything comes at the end. So you number them, and you have like a title page And usually it includes things like incident history, your infers reports, police reports, laboratory analysis, your diagrams, photo logs, weather, printouts, any of that stuff. I just have a folder, and when I get something, I'll number it, the next number, and put it in the folder. It goes to the back of the report. All of your supplemental interviews, photo logs, everything goes as an attachment and is numbered. So at any time, you're sitting next to the attorney in court, and they ask you a question, you can quickly, oh, that's number 13, go to tab number 13, and there's the whole whatever it was, interview or whatever you had there. Here's an example. Last little bit, sign your report. You don't have to have everything peer reviewed, but I'll tell you what, it sure is nice when someone else takes a look at your report, especially for grammar and spelling. Consider attachment tabs. You can get those Avery tabs, relatively cheap. You can put a binder together, or nowadays everything's electronic. So make your PDF out of it. You can put your photos, everything on a flash drive. Depending on who wants it and how they want it. There's Dropbox. There's a lot of different things that we can do.
Bob, being asked, do you have a method by which you archive your data into a searchable database?
So I use basic file folders on the computer for all this. I don't, at this point, move everything to like an editable PDF or anything like that. The technology guru is standing next to me. I'll let him kind of address how he may do
I'll
that.
admit it. Just say it, geek. Yeah, there are many ways. Pardon me?
Several times during this seminar, a word has been used, and there are several new people who are brand new to the pleasure in the room. One word's been used several times in the conference.
In this room, there are several brand new people, and I'm sure in Zoom land there's other people, and they have no idea what the word calcination means. And it's been used several times. Could you explain that for them, please?
Sure. You want to go or you want?
Sure. Yeah. Calcination is basically a dehydration of drywall. So, waterboard or drywall usually has, 20 or so % of water in it. That's why it works so well, for insulating and for fires. So when you have heat and fire basically attacking it, it basically dehydrates and causes damage to it. So when you have calcination, you can use kind of a dull point, and you can actually measure how deep you can go. So the deeper that you're able to go, the deeper you're able to go is the more damage, and means the more heat and fire basically that has gone against it. So if you put up a your wall at home that's never been damaged, you're going to penetrate it all, but something that is, you could actually mark that up and get a picture of where the most severe damage is to it.
Yeah, and this is a very interesting example. I mean, we've got fire investigators in here, brand new ones, have some experience and wanted to know what calcination means. All right, if you're going to stand in front of a jury of 12 people, do you think they know what calcination means? Do you think you can start talking about the chemical composition of drywall? You have to create or be able to produce an explainable process about calcination. And he did a very good job. He says there's water in the drywall. The heat of the fire drives that water out. And when it drives the water out, it changes the density. When it changes the density of how hard that drywall is, it makes it softer. And if we can measure how deep that softness goes inside the drywall and compare it to other areas on the drywall, we can make a reasonable, draw a reasonable inference that the softer or the deeper that probe goes into the drywall, it was exposed generally to the energy of the fire for a longer period of time. It would just make sense that if we have a depth of softness in the drywall that goes halfway through on this side, and it only goes maybe 1 millimeter on this side, we can reasonably draw the inference that the heat of the fire was on this drywall for a longer period of time than here, which would which would draw the conclusion that this was closer to the area of origin. Stuff like that. That's what you have to do. And we have another question over here.
How does the intensity of the fuel package in that specific area affect that? And does that make it kind of water it down a little bit?
Well, yeah, the fuel packages in the area, ventilation will do it too. Chances are, what the research that Steve has been doing about areas of origin in the back corner, but you've got a ventilation opening, it's going to be much deeper there. You have to be able to explain that as well. And that what might be happening. If you do a depth of calcination diagram and you've got the deepest calcination at the front window, but you're saying the area of origin is in the back bedroom, you got some explaining to do, Lucy, and you better be able to explain why. And it's very simple. You talk about the ventilation effects. You might talk about fuel packages. And we've been doing some research and getting some of the college kids, and I'm going to jump in the weeds here for a second. If it changes the density of the drywall, it also may change and does change the rate of absorption or evaporation. So what we've been doing some small scale testing, and we've been doing some full scale burns where we go in after a fire with a thermal imaging camera and we measure the heat. We get the heat signature, and then hours or weeks after the fire, we've gone back and sprayed down the drywall with water, and we've watched how long it takes to absorb the water. And then we've measured it with a FLIR, and you can see temperature differences because the amount of water and the rate of evaporation also has an effect on the temperature of the drywall. And we've been seeing very congruent and similar patterns where the depth of calcination corresponds with the temperatures of the drywall weeks after when we spray it with water. So, but the depth of calcination is only one data point. Mm-hmm. You'll have to use a lot of other things, and it's just more data you can compile to support your area of origin, and that's just one of them. And how many of us do depth of calcinations on every fire? Absolutely not. But some of this research may make it easier. Yes, sir.
I have a question regarding the tools you use for testing depth of calcination, because I went out and grabbed a tire gauge figuring that would be a good tool, but honestly, I can push that thing all the way through a wall. How do you keep the pressure constant so you get a consistent reading throughout your calcination testing and data gathering?
Oh, I'm looking for my pocket protector now. This is some really geek stuff, but and part of the presentation that Rick and I have done in the past about tools and technology, we recognize Jamie Novak. He produced and built a home-built depth of calcination device, and essentially what it is, it's a digital tire gauge, depth gauge. But what he's done is he attached it to, and I've got a couple of them, and I've got pictures I can show you maybe offline or during the break, where it's attached to a PVC handle pipe, and inside that pipe is a compression spring. And so what we essentially do is we zero it out on a piece of drywall that's not damaged. And then when we go and push it anywhere in the wall, that spring is got a particular pressure. And that spring is what presses it in, because the wide base of the tire gauge just sits up against the drywall and the spring pushes in the probe. And I've been able to detect changes, depths of calcination changes in as little as 4 inches apart. And I've been able to use that to narrow down an area of origin. And in this particular case, I'm talking about the greatest depth of calcination when I went like 4 inches apart was directly over the receptacle that the electric blanket was plugged in, and the mattress was pushed up against it, and it crimped the cord. So I can show you that, or anybody's interested maybe at a break. That's our geek presentation we do in other places. So.
Bob Toth, can we circle back to, you were talking about archiving databases and stuff. Can we get back to that, please?
Yeah, there's you're going to have to find what fits your eye or what you're able to do. We've got policies and procedures in our organization on how we do that. Essentially, we back up on the server. The server is backed up on a cloud twice a day. And then I also have a external 8 terabyte hard drive, 2 of them, that I rotate through on a weekly basis and keep off site. So I've got it in 3 different places. But one other tip, and I'll show you this by lunchtime or before we start the CV presentation after lunch. Every document that I get in reference to an investigation, I have a desktop scanner, and it scans it as a searchable PDF. And each time I scan a new document, I attach it to my case notebook. Sort of like the homicide detectives of a generation ago, you'd go into the homicide, the detective's office, and you'd see 7 or 8 3-ring binders. And every time they get a new piece of data, they would put it in a particular binder and move it around and stuff like that. I can do it electronically now. And what I don't have to do is catalog them in order. We can create bookmarks that is cataloged in order. So all you need to do is open up the index or the table of contents, and you can scroll right down. And I'll show you that during part of the presentation too. The searchable PDFs are really cool because if you've got a 24-page document or a 2,400-page document, or I'll show you one of 467 pages, you can immediately go to the bookmarks and find what you're looking for, or search by keyword. So there's a host of ways to do it. I don't save any paper. I scan everything, and then it's backed up on our server twice a day in the cloud, and then I have an external hard drive, and that's just my policy and procedure. When whatever works for you is what you have to develop. Did that answer the question?
I believe so.
Thank you.
Perfect. Let me wrap up, then you can,
Okay.
you can do the final cherry on top. Okay, so we're good. We're done with our public report. Now, a lot of these, almost all of these categories can be used for the private one, but I wanted to include a few things, some headings that may be different for your private one. So, claim or case number for the public, claim number possibly, or your case number for your report. Now we're talking about the insured, right? So usually it's the building owner or the tenant or various other people, but who's that? Claims representatives or insurance information. What's the scope of your assignment? That becomes very important sometimes. What were you called to do? Were you called to just review something or the whole thing? What kind of supplemental insurance information is out there? So those are just some of the other items that you're going to want to include in your private reports. The other thing that in the private reports we do many times is we incorporate our photographs. It doesn't mean that the public guys can't do this, but we incorporate our photographs into our descriptions. So for instance, you may say examination of the front door locks revealed evidence of forcible entry damage as depicted in photograph 5. Now you could either embed photograph 5 in your narrative, or you just keep it on a photo log sheet. But you could go through and describe the whole exterior and interior with photographs, right? So a lot of times I'll have my photo layout. I'll have that already with my descriptions on it, and then I just go through and describe my scene per my photographs. So that's just another way to do it. A few other things. If there's a joint examination or a supplemental investigation that you do, you're going to want to include that and what happened at the scene. Any follow-up investigation requested, you're going to want to include. This is very similar to the supplemental part of the 10 category report. Also in your addenda or your attachments, you're going to want engineering reports, right? Lab reports. And from the private side, you're going to want to get fire and investigation reports added. Last part real quick. For me is a list of opinions. So again, we're talking about if you have to go to court, this is kind of a nice outline that I like to use because I reference my opinions. So for instance, if my opinion, number 1, is that significant fire damage with evidence of abnormal electrical activity was observed on the remains of a power strip, discovered in the area of origin. Well, what do I have to back that up? Well, letter A talks about a company fire examination report that I reviewed. So I'm referencing someone else's report on a page that they, stated that was the case as well. I can talk about a figure or a photograph. I can refer to engineering analysis report, or I can refer also to photograph 55. There's a picture of it that I could talk about. So anytime I have an opinion, I want to, good. Real quick, anytime I have an opinion, I want to back it up with how I arrived at that opinion. And here's an example. Yes.
Bob, jumping back to because I think this is going to apply more to the public side.
Mhm.
If you've got a county task force or if you've got a strike force, a task force coming in to do a big fire, does everybody do their own report or does that fall to the lead investigator?
That's a great question. My suggestion is the jurisdiction where it occurred, whoever is in charge of that investigator is the investigating officer. Everything goes through them. What I suggest is if you have multiple entities. So for instance, if I've got the police are involved, maybe we have a body and ATF comes out. I basically will choose a lead person for each agency. So from the police department, that person is going to be the lead. So all of the police officers under that jurisdiction, they all send their reports to him. He then sends it to me. And those are all supplemental reports of what they've done. ATF, the same way. You have a lead agent. All of the other agents send all their stuff to them as the one point of contact. Otherwise, it's too hard for me as the lead investigator to try and chase everybody down for their supplemental reports or what they did. Once I get all that information, my report with all the information that I've gotten as a result of the task force or anything, that all gets put in the report in the appropriate places. Meaning the other officers or investigators' reports, their supplementals go in as an attachment in category 10. Okay. Question back in there?
Want to see you run. Good job. One thing, on this topic, we learned over time, really important just to have one origin and cause report, especially on a larger incident. You've got a county task force, other agents, even people within the police department who might have some, origin and cause, arson investigation type experience or training, agree on one origin and cause for the incident and who's going to do it. We've deferred, I think, at least twice, not three times, to NRT. If NRT came out, usually the ATF guy they were best suited that the origin and cause came out of ATF and not the local jurisdiction. Okay. And of course, everything else, you have investigative reports, what was done, that's all supportive, but only one origin and cause determination report.
Agreed. So I think everybody heard the question, but whoever is the investigating officer, whoever's responsible for it from whatever agency, once, it's just like an incident command, but it's it's a branch of the whole incident, right? So now we've got the fire investigation portion of it. Whoever everybody decides is going to be the lead investigator, that's the person that's going to be responsible for the one origin and cause report. You look at some of these larger fires that have occurred and you've got hundreds of people involved. One person has to be the key. Otherwise, you don't want to have different origin and cause determinations. Agreed. I'm going to bypass questions right now and turn it over to Bob. He only has, I think, an hour and a half. Yeah. So go ahead.
No problem.
Thank you.
We'll continue through this or continue up to lunch through this. Whatever we don't get done, we'll finish up. Tom has asked me to speak regarding CVs and resumes and what's the difference. We'll talk about that after lunch. But I always like to start off with this. And this sort of dovetails into what Randy was saying the first day. It's not here to teach you anything. We're here to change your behavior. What I want all of you to do is just think about what you're doing and look at ways to improve what you're doing. That should be our goal all the time, to be better the next time. What can we do to improve our product? Excuse me here a second. Okay. So we're not here to teach you all the facts and teach you the right things to do it. We're here to get you to think about your work product. By way of background here, oops, for some reason I can't. Okay, we're going to need my AV guy to come back and figure out why I can't show the screen anymore. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Okay, I fixed it. Okay. if you have any questions or you want anything that I show you here today and after lunch, there's my email address, and you guys are all good investigators. You can hunt me down. You know how to find me. I'm more than happy to share the slides and examples here. Rob talked a lot about what goes into a report. I've got some examples, be them good, be them bad, but those will be available as well. And that's where I learned a lot about how to write reports. I searched for expert reports online. I download them, I read them. One of the examples that Rob gave in his report is I used to have fire investigators that would look at the receptacles and say the receptacles were victims of the fire and not responsible for it. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're applying human emotions to this thing. They were not victims. You got to find better words to use. I like to say that the receptacles were presented with consequential damage and were eliminated for the cause of the fire. That sounds a little bit better. That's, the analogy I give is, remember back to high school, you wanted to take your date to the prom. There's many ways to take your date to the prom, okay? You can take the bus. You can take the van with the green shag carpet, or you could spend a few bucks and rent a nice limo, okay? All right? Sort of the same way with fire investigation reports. We are being able to write, you can write a report that looks really good and polished. You can take the same text in that report and do something different with it, and it doesn't reflect very well, because most of the time it's extinguished, the building has been raised and rebuilt. The only thing that really stands a testament to your investigation and the quality of that investigation is the quality of your report, okay? So feel free to contact me anytime with questions or requests, anything at all. This is a good book to try and hunt down. It's written by a group of attorneys. You know, the attorneys, the ones that sit across from you at deposition or at opposing counsel's table and beat you about the head and shoulders with your report. These guys wrote a book on how to write expert reports. They actually have examples of fire investigation reports in there and courtroom transcripts on experts testifying and how they got impeached or how they were able to rehabilitate themselves when they were caught off guard by some of the questions during cross-examination. I'd highly recommend that book as well. But what is pertinent to your report? It really depends on the scope of your investigation and the time and resource limitations you have. Rob gave a lot of information, but the reality is sometimes we don't have the time or the resources to do all of that stuff. It's just based on what we've been provided with. But what I like to tell investigators is if you've done an investigation, and whether it's criminal or accidental, and you've got that thing nailed, like I know how it happened, I know where it happened, and I know who's responsible for it, okay, you're not done. You're not done. I tell investigators to, once you've identified origin, cause, and responsibility, assume the role of that responsible party. Assume the role of the, quote, arsonist, or assume the role of the manufacturer who may have designed that piece of equipment, or assume the role of the maintenance man who was last in there painting with the stain and put a pile of rags in a corner. And then look at that fire from his or her perspective and say, okay, that guy says I started, but he didn't rule out this, or he didn't think of this, or, that pattern over there certainly would put the area of origin away from where I was working. And assume that person's role and be prepared to defend your origin and cause. You have to be just as confident with how the fire could not have started as you should be with how the fire did start. We'll finish with this right here. All right, leave you with this. I talked about the analogy about taking your best girl to the prom. You can take the bus, or you can rent a really nice limo, or somewhere in between you can get the van with the shag carpet. I'm going to show you one page of one report, and I want you to tell me, is this the bus or is this the limo? This is the bus. All right. And when we come back from lunch, we're gonna take this bus and trade it in for a limo. And I'm going to show you some examples of how, because I'll tell you what, this was 27 pages that I had to read for the defense counsel. There were only 3 paragraphs. You know why there were 3 paragraphs? The investigation took 3 days. And at the end of this, the content was superb. The presentation, what's the word I'm looking for, sucked. But at the end of analyzing this report, I told the defense attorney, I said, in your client's best interest, what you need to do is enter into a plea agreement with the prosecutor. And he says, thank you, I'm an honest attorney. And I interrupted him and I said, oh, you're the one. And, but that's what he did. He entered into a plea agreement. Obviously the insurance did not pay and justice was served. So we're breaking for lunch. We'll come back. We'll finish up on this, and then we're going to talk about what the difference is between a CV and a resume and how to build a good one for you for future testimony.